Hi, I'm Alex Pault, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Talking Timepieces, where we talk about watch collecting and horology. Today I've got a beautiful piece that my friend let me borrow. It's a Breitling Navitimer with a UTC module, or GMT module, depending on how you call it. But it's an excellent alternative to getting a Navitimer GMT, which we'll also compare it to, because I happen to have one of those in my collection. So, before we turn the camera around, if you like the show, please subscribe. It's really important, and it does help the show tremendously to have a larger number of subscribers. You get treated better by YouTube if you have more subscribers, obviously. So if you like the show, please subscribe. It really helps a lot. So let's turn the camera around and take a look at this really cool watch. Here we have the venerable and historic Breitling Navitimer. It is a great watch in watch history for a couple of reasons. It's arguably the first smartwatch. You could actually do things with it more than just tell the time. You can actually calculate with it, and that is why it was originally created. It was made to allow aviators the ability to calculate things like speed and fuel and such while they were flying. I recognize that the letters look really small, but pilots are supposed to have really good eyesight, right? The calculation aspect of it is the slide rule bezel. Now, it's the same kind of slide rule as you would see in a standard slide rule layout. Now, a slide rule works by taking logarithms, which are numerical relationships between numbers, and converting those numbers into distances. So you could actually use a slide rule to calculate math. So, for example, let's keep it simple, and we'll go to it's called the C and the D lines here. And if I go to 2, right? I put the hairline on 2, and I move this center slider. You see the center slider moves. And I line it up with the 1, right? I now have the 2 times table lined up. 1.5 is 3. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6. Obviously, you can do much more complicated calculations on this, but I just figured I'd show you the basics to show you that it really did work. And they used this to make the Saturn V rocket, so it was pretty effective. Now, the exact same thing works on here. Let's zoom in and I'll show you. Okay, now that same the C and the D charts are actually on here. This doesn't do the higher functions, so it's got a couple of different functions crammed in here, but there is your standard C and D lines here, as you would call it, from a slide rule. So so as you see here, I've already done, I didn't want to fumble with it on screen, so I've already lined up the index for calculation with 8, and if we go all the way around here to 20, you'll see it says 16. Now, the reason I wanted to point that aspect out, if you notice, it's 8 times 20 is not 16, it's 160. When you're doing calculations on a slide rule, you have to keep the decimal point in your head and know the size of the numbers you're doing. So the slide rule might tell you 16, but you know it's 160 or 0.16. You have to maintain the decimal point in your head, which is why you actually had to be reasonably smart to use a slide rule just to keep that floating without error. Now, one of the other aspects of a pilot's watch, and in this case, I would think the penultimate pilot's watch in one sense, because of its ability to calculate, one thing pilots need to know is UTC time. I mean, universal time, right? So, which is another word for it is Zulu time by the military, or GMT time for the rest of us. And back in the earlier days, a chronograph function was complex enough, and to get a chronograph with GMT function was actually a pretty sophisticated way to go. This is a Navitimer GMT. I've got a video on this in the archive. And but if you don't have GMT functionality in your chronograph, how do you tell a second time zone? Easy. You use the UTC module that Breitling made for this watch. And let's zoom in on that and take a look. And so in the UTC module, the way Breitling did it is it's an integrated, you could call it a smart link. It's a link in the bracelet that has a little quartz watch built into it. And in this case, it's 24-hour format. So you get a very elegant second presentation of the time. It's a little more complex in one sense, but it's also more simple in another. This is a small quartz piece to go with the big mechanical piece. The reason they didn't go with mechanical in the link is because of size, of course. A mechanical movement small enough to fit in that link would be actually quite expensive. So you can go two ways. You can go with a GMT Navitimer, or you could go with a Navitimer, traditional Navitimer with a GMT module. Which do you prefer? Let us know in the comments. I think both presentations have their pluses and minuses. Using a standard strap, you can swap straps around more easily and the like. Whereas on this, if I swap this to a NATO, I'd lose my UTC module. I pretty much have to keep it on the metal strap in order to maintain all of my time functionality. So there, like I said, there are pluses and minuses. In one sense, this is a more elegant presentation, but then depending on how you look at it, this could be a more elegant presentation depending upon where you place value in the watch chain, as it were. So let's take a couple of measurements and then throw it on the wrist and see what it looks like. Wristwatch check. I forgot to put my wristwatch back on. I was messing around with all of this earlier. I was wearing my El Primero Chronomaster Open Heart, which I have on a NATO right now. As I mentioned, I love to swap straps around, and having the Chronomaster on the NATO strap sports it up and makes it a little bit more of a casual wear. So let's look at this a little bit more closely and yeah, throw it on the wrist. Now, let's do some quick measurements. So we're looking at a 41 case size, so it's a good size. This is a 44, so it's a huge piece. So that's another thing to think about, is that this kind of a presentation allows you to go with a slimmer wrist presence as opposed to the wall clock on your wrist of a 44 millimeter watch if you don't have the wrist for it. Now, the lug to lug on here does count because the UTC is a link, so it's not going to be sticking out or giving, see, it's not going to give any additional length to the watch. So lug to lug, we're talking about 46 and change. So we're in good shape there. Let's look at the crystals. Oh, there we go. It's a sapphire up top, and it's a sapphire down below, which is nice because some would fear that since it's a quartz module, it might have skimped on the link. But no. This is up to the same fit and finish standards as the bigger piece on it. So as I said, this can be seen as a very cool, elegant, sharp, depending on, like I said, your taste in watches. This is a really cool way to go. Let's throw it on the wrist. Luckily, my friend Rob has wrists similar to mine in size. A little tight, but I can do it for the presentation. And there we go. It does look really nice on the wrist. See? You tilt, bang, you get the second time zone. You tilt it this way, bang, you get the watch. It sits nice on the wrist because the link, it is, you know, an articulated link. It folds down. It doesn't lock into the lugs in any way to keep it from flexing. So it sits nicely on the wrist and it doesn't cause a lot of hardship in that sense. So yeah, beautiful piece, nice presentation. Which way would you go? GMT or UTC? Let's know in the comments. we'll flip the camera around now and close out the episode. So that was the Breitling Navitimer with UTC, a really interesting alternative to the Navitimer GMT, and all in all, a great, historic, cool tool watch. Thanks for taking the time to watch. I really appreciate it.